Tell you what, Lee, that's a long intro. I know. Got to do something about it. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the September Astro Talk. I can't see the crowd. I can see a projector right in my eyes, but I know there's a big crowd here. Hopefully there's a big crowd home watching. Welcome tonight. We come to you live from Mueller Hall, and we have astronomy royalty in the house. You might not think he is, but he is. Tonight we hear from Professor Fred Watson, who will be presenting a talk on Australia's largest optical telescope, which is having its 50th anniversary of its opening in October 1974, so next month. Fred is the Australian Government's Astronomer-at-Large, an outreach, advocacy and advisory role in the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, educated in Scotland at the Universities of St Andrews and Edinburgh. Yeah. Fred worked at both of Britain's Royal Observatories before joining the Australian Astronomical Observatory as Astronomer-in-Charge in 1995. I feel old now. I was in year 12 then. I feel old. Today, he's best known for his award-winning radio and TV broadcasts, books, music, dark sky advocacy, and Space Nuts podcast. Highly recommend Space Nuts podcast. Very good podcast. Thank you. His work also includes providing expert astronomy advice to the government. Fred is an adjunct professor in several Australian universities. He also has an asteroid named after him, 5691 Fred Watson, but says that if it hits Earth, it won't be his fault. Following Fred, we'll hear from our very own astronomer-at-large, Bill Stent, the telescope gent, who will share with us what's in the sky over the next month. But before we begin, I'd like to say, in the spirit of reconciliation, the Astronomical Society of Victoria acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, and I always get this wrong, and their connections to the land, sea and community, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. Fred, I'm going to hand it over to you. Take it away. I'm going to redshift off the stage.
Thanks very much for coming. Is the PA working? Yes. I'm going to change to my presentation. And while I do that, I would like to get all these lights off the screen, please, because they're crap. Yep. So you've got 2 minutes while I do this. No, don't make the speaker grumpy. That's right. Absolutely. Here we go. And hopefully it's going to do that. Yeah. So I'd really like to get the screen dark. Perfect. Seems to be another one over here that might be doing the same sort of thing. Thank you. Sorry to be a pain. But the name on the bottom of this, if you think I'm pedantic about my pictures, you should get David Malin. He'd be rebuilding the projector because he wouldn't be happy about the colors that it shows. But I am, because I'm not a David Malin, and never will be. I'll be talking about David in a minute, and I bring his greetings. He's still in good shape. We see each other about once every week or so. He lives not very far from me in northern Sydney. So I want to, in this talk, take you to Gamilaroi country. And this is part of New South Wales. It actually extends a long way to the north, almost to the border, with Queensland, and butts up against Wiradjuri country, which comes down here too, to Victoria. This is a painting by Bargay Avery of some of the feelings that he has about Gamilaroi country. And that's where we're going to be tonight. But I would, as well as acknowledging the Gamilaroi people, acknowledge the local traditional owners here. Because I always feel that we, in the world of astronomy, have got such a lot in common with our First Nations brethren and sisters in this country, in that we see the sky simply as an extension of country. And that's what it feels like to me. And it's always a pleasure to acknowledge the traditional owners. So coming right up to date, here's a relatively recent photograph of the Anglo-Australian Telescope dome. I'll get this out of the way right at the beginning. I usually tell people that I worked in that building for so many years that I started to look like it. I once gave that gag in I think it was in Adelaide, and I said all that, and I said, one day when the rest of my hair falls off, I'm going to have a walkway tattooed around here. And this guy stood up in the audience and he said, I'm a tattooist, I'll do it for you now if you like. Oh, no, it's just a joke, just a joke. So the big dome, the big white dome, and that's really what my talk title is tonight, because I want to say a lot about the telescope, but a lot about as well what it's meant to many people in all walks of life, not just in astronomy. So it's the AAT and its place in the universe, which is very important. That's me. As you've heard, my job is the Australian government's Astronomer-at-Large. And the reason I'm called that is because for 20 years I was the Astronomer-in-Charge here at Siding Spring Observatory. And then when the governance of the telescope changed, they were looking for a new title for me. And they said, if we make him the Astronomer-at-Large, we've only got to change 4 letters on the office door from Astronomer-in-Charge. They didn't realize it was a different office, in fact, in a different state, actually, but never mind. It worked. So the Department of Industry, Science and Resources consists of 2,400 grown-up bureaucrats, most of whom are about half my age, and 1 astronomer. So that's how the title came about. But I do still have some university affiliations to give me some street cred, one of which is going to become more important over the next couple of years or so. But I won't say any more about that because the minister doesn't know yet. The main reason for giving this talk is that this year the AAT celebrates its 50th anniversary. And exactly as Mark said, on the 16th of October 1974, it was formally opened. And so we're celebrating that, and I'll say a little bit more about how we're celebrating it shortly. So the dome really doesn't give you any idea of what that building is. It's just a big round thing, in this case decorated by a red ribbon around the walkway, which was for its 40th birthday. That was taken 10 years ago. I'm not giving away any secrets, I don't think. Oh, maybe I am. So this shouldn't go beyond these 4 walls. But this year it's going to be a gold ribbon because it's a golden anniversary. So we'll have a ribbon around it next month. But it's what's inside it that, of course, makes that a very, very special place. And this lovely cutaway diagram was produced by artists at Australian Geographic quite a long time ago now, but the inside hasn't really changed very much. The telescope at the top with walkways all over the place because it's a big machine. It's not something you can, sort of sit on your lap and point to the sky. There is a control room, which is there, and I'll show you some pictures of that. Down on the 4 floors below that, and each of these floors is about twice the height of a normal story, there is this thing, which is the illuminizing plant. Every year, the mirror is taken out of the telescope and given a new coating of aluminium, and that's the plant that does it. There are offices all around here. I think that's mine there. And the base is usually full of stuff, not just 3 people saying, what shall we do with this empty space? It's full of a truck and a couple of cars, as well as the stores, which are in the middle of this central pier, which is what supports the telescope. The building is built in 2 parts. There's a central pier with a telescope on top of it. Completely independent of that is the outer building. And that's so that vibrations, for example, from the dome rotating aren't transmitted to the telescope. The dome weighs about 600 tons, the amount of a small train, I guess, a suburban train. Let me take you back in time, though, and this is the mountaintop. Siding Spring is its name. About 60 years ago, when the Australian National University decided this was going to be their escape from the lights of Canberra, where Mount Stromlo Observatory was starting to get washed out by the suburbs that were growing around it. And so they built a few telescopes on top, the 40-inch, the 24-inch, and the 16-inch. That was the 40 inches, the one on the right there. And that was the start of it. Now, you probably know, I've already mentioned, it's called Siding Spring. In Gamilaroi, it is Woorat. That's the name of the mountain. And the range of mountains are the Warrumbungles. And Warrumbungle, again, is a Gamilaroi word. It means crooked mountains. And indeed they are. It's the remnants of a shield volcano that switched off about 13 million years ago. I remember it quite well. So what happened? Well, it got transformed into something like that, with the Anglo-Australian Telescope dome dominating the scene. And the start of the history of the AAT actually goes back to the late 1950s, when major radio astronomy facilities were being built both in Australia and in the United Kingdom. Some of you might have heard of Jodrell Bank, which is a 250-foot dish in the north of England, still going strong. That was built in 1957. In 1961, we had the Parkes dish, Murray Yang as it's now called, as well, coming into being. And so the radio astronomers were absolutely going gangbusters with these new facilities and able to make some quite astonishing new discoveries. It's when quasars were being discovered, things of that sort. And the optical astronomers, the people who rely on visible light, were miffed at this. Why don't we get something new, they said, I quote. And in fact, it was Richard Woolley, later Sir Richard Woolley. He was the 11th Astronomer Royal, but before that he was the director of Mount Stromlo Observatory in Canberra. And he was the person who said Britain and Australia should get together, put all their pennies together and build a world-class telescope in Australia. And that's how it started. It took a long time for the two governments to agree. The science minister on the UK side at that time was a lady called Margaret Thatcher, who you didn't mess with. And I think there was some quite fiery exchanges, probably comparable with what we saw today from the United States. The bottom line, though, was that in 1967, word came through that the two governments had agreed that they would jointly fund a telescope in the, what we now call the 4-meter class, 150-inch class at the time. And so a project team was formed and the work started. And one of the first things that they had to do was think about the mirror. The mirror of a telescope, as I'm sure you all know, is the most important part of it. The detectors are quite important as well, but the mirror is the main focus of a big telescope. And so we're talking about now a 4-meter diameter mirror, which was going to be made of a fairly newfangled glass ceramic called Servit. And that Servit is made by a company, or it was, it's not made now, but by a company called Owens, Illinois, who were in Ohio, despite their name. And Owens, Illinois hosted the project team early on in the piece. So this was July 1967, with the two people on the right from the Anglo-Australian Observatory project team and the two people on the left from Owens, Illinois. I've always thought this deserved a few impressions. That person there is somebody who's got relevance in this town. That is a man called Herman Wehner, who was the engineer, the chief engineer at Mount Stromlo. And he was the person who rebuilt the Great Melbourne Telescope when it arrived there in the late 1940s. And he's also the person, I think, who helped to pull the wreckage to pieces before it came down here for the Great Melbourne Telescope rebuilding project. Sadly, Herman died last year. He passed away at the age of 99 in October last year. Next to him is Ben Gascoigne, who another very eminent astronomer from Mount Stromlo. The person who's always intrigued me, though, is the guy at the back. All he had to do was step forward, because this thing is white hot. It's white hot Servit. He could have just put his cigarette on the end of that and he'd have had a light. So this is the very early part of the history of the AAT. And not very long after that, well, 2 years later, the mirror was cast. It was made of molten Servit and cast into this 4-meter diameter shape. And this photograph is quite remarkable again. It's when the project team went to Owens, Illinois to do stress testing, which you can do by polarizing the light. You shine a polarized light through the back of the mirror, and it's not opaque, but it is not transparent. It's quite translucent, and that will tell you about the stresses in it. Once again, these are all people I've worked with, actually. The gentleman on the left, in fact, was my first boss. His name was David Brown, and he worked at the telescope building company in Newcastle on Tyne in England called Sir Howard Grubb Parsons and Company Limited. And of course, the Grubb is the same Grubb who built the GMT. Now, that was my first job, actually. I worked for Grubb Parsons for a couple of years at the time when this work was going on. So my association with the AAT goes back almost longer than anybody else alive. There's one person left who's been involved longer than I have. But David was a very great optical scientist. I've never really understood why he didn't sack me, because I did bugger all in that job. I really messed around. And he once told me in later life, well, it was your potential, my boy. And I thought, well, all right. I wouldn't have, honestly, I wouldn't have put up with me if I'd been him. And just to cut quickly, I don't want to spend too much time. The gentleman with the bow tie is Ben Gascoigne, who I mentioned a minute ago. So that was when the mirror was being accepted for optical polishing, and it went to Newcastle-on-Tyne, where it was polished under the supervision of another old friend, sadly no longer with us, David Sinden. David Sinden, too many Davids around. David Sinden was the chief optician at Grubb Parsons. Here he is with the AAT mirror, doing what none of us would ever do with a mirror, put our fingers on it. That's because he knew that the top layer was going to come off because of the next polishing run. This was their 20-foot polishing machine. So that was really quite late on in the work. And then, meanwhile, stuff was happening at Siding Spring. Companies were putting together, first of all, the foundations and a lot of concrete, a lot of formwork like that. This is how you build a 4-meter telescope. Get big cranes, you get lots of concrete, and you start building a structure like that. And you get an idea here of what the structure's like. The innermost part of it is a concrete cylinder with that pier that I mentioned before right in the middle. But you can see that there is a cladding on top of that that's just starting to go on in this photograph. That cladding is a heat shield. It's to stop the sun's heat from warming up the building and spoiling the view. And it was made of something called galbestos. I wonder what that would have in it. So it's not there anymore. There is a cladding there now, but it's made of colour bond, basically. So lots of scaffolding. Anybody interested in scaffolding? If you're going to build a dome, you need scaffolding. It's incredible, isn't it? We just don't think of this sort of engineering on the scale, simply because it's not happening much, although there is a place in South America where something that dwarfs this is happening as we speak. But the work went on, and you can see how the sort of onion skin of the dome went together, the cladding there getting more and more completed. And eventually, the bits of the telescope started arriving. That's part of the what we call the horseshoe, which is the main part of the hour angle bearing. And eventually, in December 1973, the mirror arrived. It was shipped from Newcastle-on-Tyne to Newcastle in New South Wales, and then rode this low loader from Newcastle, New South Wales to Coonabarabran, the nearest town to Siding Spring Mountain. The city fathers of Coonabarabran, and mothers probably, were people who recognized that because one of the world's biggest telescopes, and in fact at the time of its construction it was the biggest in the southern hemisphere, that was going to come to Coonabarabran. They realized this was going to transform this little sleepy country town and make it quite different, which it did. And I'll mention that a little bit later on. So what they did was they gave the mirror a civic reception when it arrived. And it then did a lap of honor around the town. It's not a very big town. Some of you, I'm sure, have been. And the lap of honor was so popular, they did it twice. It went round twice, and everybody, yeah, this great mirror, fantastic stuff. And eventually, it all went together and made the telescope that we who have been associated with it know and love. There's that horseshoe mounting that I mentioned. 3.9 meter diameter mirror with a top-end system. You probably can see that the ring at the top is double, and that's so you can take the top part off, you can change the secondary mirrors to give you different focal ratios, or you can put what we call the prime focus axis up there. Its first light was the 24th of April 1974, but it was not until later in the year that it was opened by this young chappie here, who's coming out again next month, but he's not coming to Siding Spring. His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, as he then was. This is the opening ceremony. He's being greeted there by Professor Sir Fred Hoyle, who was the head of the committee that ran the telescope, and right behind him, of course, Gough Whitlam, the then Prime Minister. Fred wrote in his memoirs, and if you've, I don't know, some of you will have been to this building. This is right outside the front door of the Anglo-Australian Telescope. It is always windy there. Doesn't matter, it's calm everywhere else. You stand outside that front door, and it's the way I think it's the way the cylindrical dome just refracts the wind around. Fred Hoyle wrote in his memoirs that because of the wind, every syllable was blown clean away in the roar of the wind, so that I was instantly reduced to the grimaces of primitive man, which, you know, kind of clashes a little bit with what the Prince was doing. Excuse me, there's another lovely story. How long have I got, Mark? Did you say till Tuesday? Yeah, okay. Because I don't want to dwell too much. I don't know whether you can see there's a flag there, which is one of three. There are three flagpoles in the background. And they were supposed to be in order with the Prince's Standard highest, the Australian flag next, and the ANU flag, the Australian National University, next. But Olin Egan, who was the director of Mount Stromlo Observatory at that time, was absolutely incensed that the university, the Australian National University, was not going to run this telescope. It was going to be run by a separate organisation. He thought it should have been run by the ANU. And so, mysteriously, before the Prince arrived, the order of the flags was changed. The ANU flag was somehow on top, and the Prince's was further down. And somebody went and fixed it, but then mysteriously it all happened again. And I think it happened 3 times before a person who was probably taller than me tied the flag halyards up so high that Olin Egan couldn't creep out from whatever bush he was hiding behind and put the Prince's Standard down. Amazing stuff. Now, so what really capitalized the telescope right at the beginning, what made it such an important asset, was the fact that it was the first big telescope in the world to be completely computer controlled, so that you could simply dial in the coordinates in the sky, the right ascension and declination, where you wanted the telescope to point, press a button and it would go there, and you'd find your object right in the middle of the field of view. Nobody had seen that before with a telescope of this size. They couldn't do that with a 200-inch in Palomar. It took people 20 minutes to find their target object. So that was what really made the telescope very, very special from the beginning. There you are. That was taken in 1974. That was our first night assistant. His name is Robert Dean. And it's fair to say that the computers have worn better than Rob has. He's still going strong. He's not part of the observatory anymore, but he does run the local community radio station, 2WCR FM. And his voice is very well known to people in the local district. He's a great guy. He has probably the best collection of vintage computers in the country outside the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney. And so if ever you've got a computer you want to get rid of, he's your man. So it became the Anglo-Australian Observatory. The telescope itself was the Anglo-Australian Telescope. It still is. And the observatory that ran it, with headquarters in Sydney, which you may have heard of, it was called the Anglo-Australian Observatory. And we had this logo, which was formed right at the beginning. And so it was a national optical observatory for 2 nations, the UK and Australia, with this really well-funded suite of auxiliary instruments, spectrographs, polarimeters, photometers, infrared photometers, all the stuff that makes the measurements of the objects that you're looking at. The telescope delivers the light and the instrumentation actually does the hard work. It became all things to all astronomers. And actually, as I've said there, it really did ignite a renaissance in British and Australian optical astronomy. For all kinds of reasons. This interesting image, by the way, David, I was talking to David only a couple of weeks ago about this, how long it took him to get the camera in exactly the right place. So when he left the shutter open to get the star trails, it was exactly coincident with the dome. But you might notice the red glow on the dome. And that is the western side. It was taken long after sunset. Twilight had finished, but there was that red glow, and it came from the eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the 1980s, which put dust all around the globe. And we felt the impact of it at Siding Spring. Talking of David, of course, he developed the 3-color method of using combined photographs, taken through 3 different color filters, to give us true color images of the night sky. And that's why he's so fussy about color balance. As I said at the beginning, if he was here, he would have the projector in pieces to get the color balance right. The Veil Nebula there in true color, and the Helix Nebula. These are iconic images that at that time in the 1970s and 80s, nobody had ever seen anything like this. And so his images were on the covers of magazines, they were on album covers, they were in books, and David became very famous indeed. There he is to say hello. And I still pay homage to David. He taught me such a lot about basically what's going on in astronomy and how to bring that to a wider public. He was always a very able public speaker. Another one of his images, the sombrero. Fantastic stuff. Now, the other thing that helped the AAT was what was next door to it. And I don't want you to look at that, I have no idea who that is. But behind that person is the United Kingdom Schmidt telescope, which was a wide-angle telescope, 1.2 meter reflecting telescope on the Schmidt optical system, what's called a classical Schmidt, to take deep, wide-angle photographs of the sky in order for astronomers using the Anglo-Australian Telescope to know where all the really interesting objects were, the things that they really needed to investigate. You need a wide field survey telescope to do that. So this one made 4 separate atlases of the southern sky in different color bands. And it's what brought me to Australia. I did come a few times in the late 70s to use the Anglo-Australian Telescope, but it was in 1982 that I came as an astronomer to use the UK Schmidt telescope, and immediately started doing weird things with it because we put fiber optics onto it, as I'll mention in a minute. But the fact that that Schmidt telescope, it's nothing to do with me, the fact that that Schmidt telescope was there also sealed the future of the Anglo-Australian Observatory. And I suppose it was almost inevitable that at some point somebody would think I knew enough about the telescope to make me Astronomer-in-Charge, which happened in 1995. I love this image. I hadn't seen this until recently. If any of you read Australian Geographic, I've got a feature in the current issue which has this beautiful picture as its opening shot. Quite recent as well, quite a recent image. Looking towards the west, few clouds dispersing, the dome open, all ready for a great night of observing. Now, the issue with Siding Spring or any other facility in Australia is that we don't have a perfect atmosphere above our heads. Many of you will be aware of that. It's particularly, I suppose, injurious at Siding Spring, where you have a 4-meter class telescope that, if you had no atmosphere, would deliver images of stars which were about 1/30th of an arc second in diameter. An arc second, you will remember, is 1/3600th of a degree. It's the angle made at your eye by a $1 coin held up at 5 kilometers. So if I walked 5 kilometers down the road in the rain and held up my $1 coin and you could see me, that would make an angle of 1 arc second, 1 second of arc. The AAT could see fine detail on a scale a 30th of that. But because we are at the bottom of an atmosphere, what we get is that. And that's on the same scale. And that would be a very good night with what we call 1 arc second seeing. Unfortunately, Siding Spring is actually one of the best places in Australia to do this. There are some others that are equally as good. The reason why the observatory is at Siding Spring is not just because of its perfect, or it's not perfect, but it's good atmospheric conditions, but also because the town of Coonabarabran is not very far away, and it's a great place for engineers and scientists to live. And so that's why Siding Spring got to host the biggest telescope in the country. But when you look at that, you think, how can you do any sort of work at all? And the answer is, well, the AAT rather than specializing in exquisitely detailed imagery, and it was pretty good, as you've seen from some of those images, but not as good as you can get on some other sites in the world. Rather than trying to compete with them, we worked on something that would accept the light from a blurry image like that. And this is what we call spectroscopy, the idea of taking that starlight, breaking it up into its rainbow colors to reveal that barcode of information that gives us all the details of the source of the light and also what it's passed through on its way to our telescope. And in fact, we pioneered a technique called multi-fiber spectroscopy. We didn't invent it. It was invented by Roger Angel in Arizona, but the Anglo-Australian Observatory took it forward in a way that had never been done before and made it our own private thing, personal thing. In fact, my PhD is on this topic. Mine was the world's second PhD on multi-fiber spectroscopy in Australia, in astronomy. The first one was actually Roger Angel's research student, John Hill, who now runs something called the Large Binocular Telescope. I don't know whether you've come across that. It's in Arizona. What is it all about? Well, your telescope forms an image of the sky with galaxies and things like that. Instead of putting a photographic plate or a CMOS detector or a CCD detector there, if you align an optical fiber accurately with every one of the objects that you're interested in, then you can take them somewhere else, line them up on the slit of a spectrograph and form an image of all of them, the spectrum of all of them simultaneously. So that, I've shown 5 objects there. We typically do it for hundreds at a time now. And actually the AAO has just built an instrument going to Chile, which uses 2,400 fibers. So it does what I've shown there, but positions 2,400 fibers so you can observe all those objects simultaneously. It doesn't take you very long when you're doing that to build up a catalogue of millions of objects. And that is wide field survey work, the kind of things that reveal unusual objects in the universe and show you the population census statistics of the universe, which is why I've said it gives you the answer to life, the universe and everything. It's not quite true, but it's a bit like that. The trick, however, is that in order for this to work, there's a number of things that you have to do. And one is you need to position your fibers with an accuracy of 100th of a millimeter. And that means you don't just plonk them down like I've shown it there. You have to have some serious engineering. And we started off at the AAT with brass plates, one of which you can see there with my name on it, because these are my stars that I was observing in the galactic center. The brass plate has got holes drilled in it very accurately, into which we plugged an optical fiber. And then they are all fed back to the spectrograph, which is somewhere else. We did that with the AAT. We also did it with the UK Schmidt telescope. I built 3 different instruments that did this for the Schmidt. So we kind of took this on. Somebody said the observatory should just be called Fibers Are Us at one time, because that was what it was all about. But then in the mid-90s, they spent some really serious money on an instrument with the ridiculous name of 2DF. 2DF stands for 2-degree field, which is the field of view of the telescope, 4 times the diameter of the moon. And 2DF sits on one of those top end rings that I mentioned before. That's it on top there, that black box. It's got lenses in it, very large ones actually. The biggest is 900 millimeters across. And then at the top, and this is the thing tipped over, so you're looking down on the mirror of the telescope on the left there, there is this robot that positions these fibers individually with that accuracy I mentioned of 100th of a millimeter on the target objects, which all come down the computer link, of course. So each of these fibers, which you can see stretched from the edge of the 2-degree field plate, has a prism on the end of it and a little magnet that sticks it onto a metal plate, and the robot moves them around, and you can observe simultaneously 400 objects with this system. So it is really very, very efficient and essentially keeps us busy. That instrument, for all it was built in the 1990s, is still active and still actually letting astronomers worldwide do the kind of survey work that they want to. 2DF's first big job was the 2DF Galaxy Redshift Survey. And what that means is that we observed with it something like 500,000 galaxies. Each one of them is represented by a dot on this, which is basically a slice through the universe. Every dot is a galaxy, and it goes out, as you can see, to about 2 billion light years away. Why is it shaped like a butterfly? It's because the bit in the middle that you can't see is where the Milky Way is. And the Milky Way obscures our view of the galaxies beyond. And so what was decided was to do these two slices in opposite directions in the sky, centered on 0 hours and 12 hours, and then to map the galaxies within them. And the results from that survey, they were published in the early 2000s, are still at the front end of astronomy. Some of you might have heard of the Hubble tension. Anybody? Does that mean anything to anybody? Where we look at the rate of expansion of the universe as measured now, and it comes from things like this, compared with the time of the Big Bang, because we can still see the flash of the Big Bang, the cosmic microwave background radiation. The two give slightly different answers. And this is still playing a role in that. Actually, you may have heard that the James Webb Telescope, the JWST, as it's properly called these days, has probably resolved that Hubble tension. We think we've seen a coming together of those different values. I've got a strange little movie it's very blurry, but this is the one lobe of that butterfly in 3 dimensions. So you can see that it wasn't just actually a single slice, it was a narrow slice. And you can see the structure in it, which I might just go back to that. This is the kind of honeycomb structure of the way galaxies are laid out in the local universe. We call it the cosmic web because it seems to be the structure on which the universe is built and has been built by galaxies. And we've got good reason for believing that cosmic web was laid down right after the Big Bang by traces of what we call dark matter, which acted as a kind of nucleus for galaxies to form. So that was its first big job, and it was eminently successful. Since then, the AAT has worked on individual galaxies. We now have a system which is called HECTOR, which is an acronym whose origin I can never remember. But HECTOR is a bit like 2DF. It uses fibers, but instead of plonking one fiber on a galaxy to get one reading from it, it plonks 60 fibers on a galaxy. So you get a whole bundle. And I think it's got about 100 of those bundles. So you can actually get data not just on the galaxy as a whole, as you do with 2DF, but you can get the details. You can look at one end of a galaxy compared with the other. An edge-on galaxy like this will have different velocities because it's actually rotating. So all of that is very much part and parcel of what the AAT does today. And the other instrument that is of great significance is an instrument called Veloce, because the person who dreamt up the name liked Italian. So Veloce measures the velocities of stars with an accuracy of a few centimeters per second. And why do you want to do that? So you can measure the details of the orbits of the planets that are going around them. So the AAT is also a planet finder and a planet identifier, and one that actually looks at the characteristics of planets and their orbits. How am I doing, by the way? Yeah, we're all right. So let's come a bit more up to date, because things did change over the decades. The British and Australian governments for many years ran the telescope jointly, with each putting in half the budget and each getting half the time on the telescope to allocate in whatever way they wanted. But in 2010, the British decided, and they were penny pinching a bit at that time, they decided they wanted to pull out of the AAO. And so the Australian government, God bless them, came to the rescue by funding the telescope in completion. We called it for a while the All Australian Observatory, the AAO, but in fact the name was changed to the Australian Astronomical Observatory, which meant that we could still use the same logo that we had before. The logo didn't change. So the Australian Astronomical Observatory kicked off in 2010. We became part of what is now the Department of Industry, Science and Resources. And it was a very successful period for Australian astronomy because the Australian government at that time had science at a high priority, and so they were able to fund some projects like replacing that outer cladding that I told you about. The galvestos cladding went, and that's the new cladding that you can see there. However, there is an issue, and that goes back to what I was saying about the atmosphere. So Siding Spring is a very dark site. I'll talk about that in a minute as well. But what it doesn't have is that absolute tranquility of atmosphere that you need for good astronomical observing. You need exquisite conditions of atmospheric stability, and you don't get those anywhere in Australia. What you need is a mountain more than about 3,000 meters high on the western seaboard of a continent, not far from the ocean or sometimes offshore island. If you've got that, then you will get what's called a laminar flow of the air from west to east over the ocean. And as it rises over the mountain, that laminar flow continues. It doesn't become turbulent and spoil your imaging, which is what happens at Siding Spring. And Australian astronomers, of course, being people who are ambitious and want to have the very best kit, decided they needed to look elsewhere. And so it was this gentleman who brokered a deal with the European Southern Observatory. This is Brian Schmidt, who you may know as the Nobel laureate, who discovered the accelerated expansion of the universe in 1998, but latterly the Vice Chancellor of the Australian National University. He's now stepped down from that job and he's just an astronomer, as he says. In fact, I'm doing science in the pub with him in about a month, so I'll see whether he really is just an astronomer or not. He had a new vision. He said we could do a deal that would let the universities keep the AAO and keep it running, but the government funding could go into a partnership with what is the finest Southern Hemisphere observatory, the European Southern Observatory. And so in July 2017, brokered by Brian and a few other senior public servants, an agreement was signed between the Australian government, represented by the then Science Minister here, Arthur Synadinos, and the gentleman called Tim Dezieu, who was then the Director General of the European Southern Observatory. They're based in Munich, but their telescopes are in Chile, in northern Chile. And that deal was the 10-year partnership that we are now not that far off the end of. We're more than halfway through. And it gives Australian astronomers access to these facilities. This is the four what are called unit telescopes of something that collectively you will all know, I'm sure, is not called Il Telescopio Grande Galileo or anything like that. It's the VLT, the Very Large Telescope. And those four enclosures each have an 8.2 meter telescope inside. That's a place called Cerro Paranal in northern Chile, where they do have this exquisite atmospheric stability. I love the fact that, yes, Australian industry engagement as well. It means we can bid to build things, as I'll show you in a second. Those four telescopes are named in the Mapuche language of the indigenous population of northern Chile, Antu, Kuyon, Melipal, and Yepon, which, if I remember rightly, is Sun, Moon, Southern Cross, and Sirius, I think is what they mean. So that is the ongoing arrangement as we speak. It comes to an end in 2027. But what it means is that Australian astronomers, as of right, have access to these facilities. And honestly, they are going great guns with them. We are seeing marvelous publications coming from that relationship. Just to give you an idea of the difference between a 4 meter mirror and an 8 meter mirror, that's one of the 8.2 meter mirrors of the VLT. Some of these large telescopes are built with segmented mirrors, I'm sure you're familiar with. The biggest single, what you might call a monolithic mirror that you can build is about 8 meters. So that represents the limits of that. You might know that ESO, the European Southern Observatory, is currently constructing what they call their ELT, the extremely large telescope, at a site called Serra Amazones, not far from Paranal, which has a mirror 39.3 meters in diameter. And that's made not solid like this, it's got segments. Some of you might be familiar with the JWST, which has 18 segments in its mirror. The ELT that the ESO is building has 798 segments to it, each of them 1.3 meters across. It is huge. It's the size of a playing field. That's another story. But 8-meter telescopes are big. We had a place with them early in the 2000s, the AAO, then the Anglo-Australian Observatory, built a fiber positioner, a little bit like 2DF for one of those unit telescopes. So that's where Australian astronomy is at the moment, but you might be asking, and it doesn't matter whether you are or not, I'm going to tell you anyway, what happened to the AAO in that new deal? And the answer is because the AAO, the telescope and its instrumentation division were so productive, they were building all these Fibers R Us machines, something had to be done about it that would preserve that expertise. And this picture was taken in 2018, just before the observatory became fragmented into the AAT itself, the Anglo-Australian Telescope, which is funded now by 11 universities, one of which is here in Melbourne, managed by the Australian National University. It has a council operating it. Chair is Julia Bryant, who's at Sydney University. And the director is Professor Chris Lidman, who I talk to almost daily because together we're organising a conference to celebrate the 50th anniversary. The instrument division became part of Macquarie University with connections to the University of Sydney, the ANU, and something called Astronomy Australia Limited. And that's now under the directorship of Richard McDermott, who's from Macquarie University. But you might notice that that is still called Australian Astronomical Optics, which means they can still use the same logo. So nobody can say that the AO spends money on new logos because we've had the same one since 1993. And well, that covered all the AAO stuff except one. Well, you know who he is. And that was when the then Minister for Science and Industry, Karen Andrews, decided she liked having an astronomer at large and gave me a cup of tea to celebrate. So that was good, back in October 2018. Let me just say a little bit. I'm nearly at the end of the talk. In fact, it's nearly Tuesday, isn't it, Mark? Still Monday, okay. The AAT Beyond Astronomy, because something like this doesn't just exist in isolation. It's got all kinds of tendrils, throughout the district, throughout different walks of life. It inspires artists, it inspires musicians. So we've got art exhibitions and indeed occasionally concerts in the Dome. All of that stuff comes out of the fact that it exists. One of the things that I've been very closely involved with, certainly when I was Astronomer-in-Charge, less so now, is the legislative environment that the telescope operates under. I can see you all starting to yawn now. He's going to talk about legislation, oh my God. But it's something close to your heart as well, because what we had to do was make sure that the observatory site was properly protected from the ills of light pollution, which you don't need me to tell you about. And so we worked very closely with the New South Wales Department of Planning to produce legislation that protects the observatory site. And the sort of shop window of that legislation is this document, the Dark Sky Planning Guideline. It puts the legal instruments into English rather than gobbledygook legalese. That was first set up in 2016. Those planning regulations mandate the guideline be followed for all developments within 100 kilometres of the observatory. So if you're building anything within 100 kilometres of the observatory, it has to satisfy the guidelines, excuse me, which means the light all goes down, basically, and upward light spill is forbidden. Actually, it extends to 200 kilometres if you're talking about coal mines or gas fields or things of that sort, which occasionally you are. And there are also national, not legislation, but almost guideline, a little bit stronger than guidelines. They're the lighting standards, two of which you may be familiar with if you're interested in dark skies, AS 4282, which controls obtrusive lighting, and AS 1158 for roads and public spaces. The committee that dictates these two these two lighting standards. They meet frequently. I'm actually a member of both committees. I have to say, and again, this must not go beyond these four walls, they are some of the most boring meetings I've ever been in, because you're talking about, you know, where you put a light in relation to a pedestrian crossing, all of that sort of stuff. But I'm there to keep them honest in terms of keeping the light going downwards. And sometimes they can do that. Sometimes they don't listen. I also have been involved, along with my wife Marnie, in what we call gentle activism. It's advocacy for dark skies, but it's a little bit stronger than that. What we mean by gentle activism is, what do we want? Moderate change. When do we want it? In due course. It's that sort of thing. You know, it's very gentle, but it works, actually. It's a pragmatism. We bring a pragmatism to it that is successful. And nowhere more so was back in, again, 2016, when we proposed that the national park, which is adjacent to the observatory, should become Australia's first internationally recognised dark sky park. And so that recognition was granted in 2016 by what was then the International Dark Sky Association, now Dark Sky International. It was the first dark sky park in the Southern Hemisphere. There were others, dark sky reserves, New Zealand, Namibia, places like that. I've said there are now 3 more in Australia. I think that's not true, actually. I think it's now 4, with another 3 to come. It's a very active region because, of course, it's got tourism potential. So the Warrumbungle National Park was the area that we covered to start with when we submitted that request. That was 112 pages in our application for the Dark Sky Park. But we included Siding Spring, which is right next to it. And, you know, it's a no-brainer that Siding Spring should have been part of it. We added that in February 2018. We had what was then called gold tier status, the darkest sky possible to have, and the tourism potential has been significant. And we had a formal opening of the Warrumbungle Dark Sky Park. This picture doesn't really give you a good impression of what it was like. It was taken at sunset. The opening was carried out by the lady who you can just see on the right there, Auntie Maureen Salter, in the Warrumbungle Dark Sky Park. We showed a lot of PowerPoint presentations. You can just see there's one on the screen there, which people were watching as the sky went dark. And then we turned everything off, and the Milky Way was right overhead. You could hear the gasp, the whole audience. They'd never seen a sky like this, so it had the desired effect. And then Marnie, my wife, she organised a conference on dark skies after that, which led to the formation of something called the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance. Who's heard of the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance? Yes, that's great. She'll be delighted. She was the founder, but she's not the director anymore. She's one of the board members. And they do a great job and keep the skies dark. And I guess I moved on in that sphere because for a number of years now, I've been very involved with protecting the night sky from the effects of satellite megaconstellations, which is something else that is a growing concern. And in fact, became part of Australia's delegation to the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, which actually considers that whole issue. They've been considering it quite wisely, actually, in recent months. I'm less involved than I was, but I'm intending to be involved again, perhaps going back to Vienna, where the committee actually sits. This was back at the beginning of last year, as I was reading my piece about Australian dark skies and how the world needed to follow an Australian good example and things of that sort, which they all seem to like. So one of the things that I didn't really enjoy, I did enjoy being in Vienna, but I didn't enjoy this. This was in January 2013, when we very nearly lost the observatory because of something called the Wombalong fire, a fire that started in the national park and swept up Siding Spring Mountain, actually went over the top of Siding Spring Mountain, where all the telescope domes are. And I think what saved us in terms of loss, there were losses, but none of the telescopes were lost. I think what saved us was lessons learned almost exactly a decade earlier, when the Canberra fire took place. January, I think it was the 19th, 2003. 400 homes were destroyed. I think 4 people lost their lives. Mount Stromlo Observatory was decimated. Lessons were learned from that on things like having ember screens against windows, cutting back vegetation, which I think saved the observatory. What they didn't save was the lodge, the Observatory Lodge, which is a motel built in the 1970s, which used to house astronomers who'd come there to use the telescopes. And in fact, it was a place that many people had close to their hearts because collaborations were forged there over dinner, over cups of tea, over beers, all the rest of it. And when it burned down, some people were happy because it was definitely out of the 1970s, but it tore at our heartstrings a little bit. You can see this picture was taken by one of the water bombing helicopters, which is another thing that saved us. And you can see the flames at the back there. The dome on the left side at the back is the UK Schmidt telescope, the one I showed you earlier. And this picture is not far from the AAT. But yes, the lodge went. However, it was insured, and so a new one was built and opened in 2017, a state-of-the-art motel, which the ANU are still, for some reason, a bit reluctant to open as a public place, partly because there's still a lot of people staying there who are astronomers and engineers, but I think one day that might be open to the public, and it is actually a very fine venue. It was christened, if I can put it that way. The first lot of people who stayed there came with this guy, seen here chatting up my wife. He set up something called Stargazing Live, which we did in 2017 and 2018 from the Anglo-Australian Telescope. It went live in the UK and it went live in Australia as well. Brian brought a team of, if I remember rightly, 73 engineers and technicians for that show because it was a live broadcast, so you can't muck around. It was certainly a baptism of fire for the new lodge because they found out all the things that were wrong with the showers and heaters and everything because of all those people being there. And just to add that every year the observatory has an open day. And in fact, the next one is a month away. It's on the 5th of October this year, where we get lots and lots of visitors, several thousand visitors. The observatory is open to the public. It's not always that we get classic British cars there. I don't have anything to do with any of these, but I like the photograph and that's why it's there. That was one of our open days a few years ago. And some of you who've been up there might know that there is a visitor centre, which is open to the public. Strangely, the ANU, when they built it, put a brick wall where the best view is. And I've never quite understood that, but anyway, it's a place that is good inside. They've got an exhibition and a little cafeteria. So if you do visit, when it's not an open day, you can find things to do up there at Siding Spring. And if you have been in that district, you might also be familiar with this, the world's largest virtual solar system drive, which takes basically the dome of the Anglo-Australian Telescope as representing the sun. That comes out at a scale of 1 to 38 million. And then along the roads of northwestern New South Wales are boards with planets on them, like that. They're scaled to size. You can see Mars on the left there compared with Jupiter. They're on 4 meter by 4 meter boards, and they go across all these 5 major highways of the northwestern part of New South Wales. As I said, it was kicked off, maybe I didn't say this, but it was kicked off in 2006. Anybody remember what happened in 2006 to Pluto? It was reclassified, and you can't see it, but each one of those roads has Pluto on it. And we were finishing, I was on the committee that ran this, we were finishing it all off just when the IAU met on the 23rd of August 2006 and classified Pluto as a dwarf planet. And so I don't have copies of them, but all the Plutos, and there's one in Dubbo, one in Merriwar, they're all over the place, 5 of them. The wording, you can see it changes, the description of the planet. It starts off talking about a planet, but it ends up talking about a dwarf planet. And that's because we were charged by the letter for these captions. And so we had to minimize the number of changes to letters to make it work. And that's why it really is a bit gobbledygookish. Never mind the spacey surprises on the highways of northwestern New South Wales. Coonabarabran still calls itself the astronomy capital of Australia. Some people might think Geraldton is now, with the square kilometre array being built in Western Australia. But Coonabarabran has always had, I think, an attitude which is more like a small university town. There's only 3,000 people live there. This is the high school, which is the highest educational institution in the place. Two of my kids went there. I lived there for 25 years. They turned out pretty good, I have to say. You know, it gives the town a little bit of an air of something a little bit more than your average country town. So you can see that there is a lot more than just a big white dome to the Australian Astronomical Observatory as it was, the AAT as it still is. So much more than a big white dome. That's the end of my talk. I'm happy to take any questions, especially if anybody wants to know how it's doing at the moment.
Are we on? Not sure. Oh, it is on. Do we have any questions for Fred? Anyone? No. You've bamboozled them with knowledge. Fred, I don't want to disappoint you, but it didn't get kept within the four walls.
It didn't what, sorry?
Get kept within the four walls. So they're going to find out about your boring meetings now.
Yes.
So we don't have any questions. There was one online where someone asked about the composition of the mirror. They missed that part.
So yes, cervit. And you can see where the name comes from, ceramic and vitreous. It's a mixture of pottery and glass, basically. Why is it special? Because it has 0 thermal expansion coefficient. You heat it up and it doesn't change its shape, which is essential for a mirror. You know, some of the early big reflecting telescopes, the 100-inch, the Hooker telescope at Mount Wilson, you had to wait hours for that to stabilize because it was made of just green plate glass, and it was very unstable with temperature.
Wonderful. Oh, we do have a question. A Russell. Over to Russell.
Well, thanks, Fred. Absolutely excellent talk, full of humour and a little bit of treason with the changing of the flags, etc., etc. Thanks very much for that. Just a question about artificial star laser adaptive optics. Was that ever considered for the facility?
A great question. That's right. So you might well know that some of the best and biggest telescopes in the world, particularly those in northern Chile and on Mauna Kea, on the big island of Hawaii, they use what are called laser guide stars. What they're doing is using a laser to excite atoms of sodium in the upper atmosphere that glow and make an artificial star, which you can then lock onto to correct for the atmospheric distortion, of which there is still a little bit at these wonderful sites. And so that just makes it even better. And actually the ELT that I mentioned, that's on a site called Serra Amazones, that will have these laser guide stars and will deliver 20 times the detail that the Hubble telescope does because it's a 39-meter mirror. Why haven't we tried it at Siding Spring? We did. We didn't try lasers. We used something called LiDAR, which is light it's like radar, but you use light. And from that, we are able to determine that there were many, many turbulent layers above the telescope. And you can't really correct for that. You need 1 or 2 that you can correct for with this adaptive optics technique. But when you've got half a dozen on a good day, you can't. So that was right at the beginning of my time as Astronomer-in-Charge. We tried that back in 1995 and decided, no, we won't embark on any kind of laser guide stars. And that's when we concentrated on the optical fibers and the spectroscopy. It's a great question, though. Thank you very much for that.
Oh, do we have any more questions? I can't see. No. Well, Fred, thank you very much for a lovely presentation.
Thank you again for having me, Mark.
That's all right. Well, I've got clapping behind as well. We are going to have you again in, 2 months up at Sea Lake.
Sea Lake.
And hopefully next year in March for the dark sky
Yes.
Alliance conference.
Whose name we can't remember.
Yeah, we can't. Neither of us can remember what it was. There is a dark sky conference that Marnie is organising. It was meant to be this week.
It was.
Starting tonight, but it's been postponed. Thankfully, it was postponed because the weather out there is not great. But so we will see Fred again in 2 months up at Sea Lake and next May, I think it is, or March or May. Keep an eye out for that anyway. But thank you very much, Fred. It's always great having you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks, everybody. Want to take this away?
Fred's got to go and give a. You've got.
What time? Oh no, I'm okay.
You've got a bit of time. He's going to be on the radio in a minute. We've got Bill Stent, the telescope gent, who's going to give us what's up in the sky for September and into October.
There we go. Thank you.
The floor is yours, Bill. You need a HDMI like the one that's here. Just use this one, Bill. Yeah. For example, here's one we prepared earlier. It's on wheels, Bill. Have you got a microphone? No. You'll have to use this one. That's okay. So yes, Fred will be coming up to Sea Lake with Marnie as well. Marnie will be giving a talk on dark sky protection up at Sea Lake, which Lake Tyrrell is an area that I'm hopeful that we can get dark sky protection at. And that's part of the reason we go up there for the event as well. We've got, who else we got up there? We've got Steffi Bernard, who's coming up for a third year. We've got Dr. Sarah Webb coming up. We also have Kobe Brown, astrophysicist Kobe Brown, coming up to Sea Lake in November as well. Are you ready, Bill?
I think so.
Bill is ready. Ready for what's in the sky for September and October.
Speaking.
Oh, I need a little laser thingy. Just going to test it. And yes, there we go. Take the glasses off too. Hello, people. What's in the sky? This is the toughest job in the world is to follow Fred. I think this is this is going to be a talk which is going to put your lighting standards people to shame. So I'm going to be talking about what's in the sky over the next month, which is late September, early October. So tonight it's fairly formulaic. Tonight we're well, first of all, we're on the lands of the Bunurong and the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation. I am going to be talking about general conditions at this time of year, and then I'm going to get into the moon, and then I've got a graph that's going to bend your brain, and I'm going to try to explain it. I don't know whether I'll actually be able to do it or not. Then I'll talk about planets, and then an alleged dwarf planet. And then I'll get into the actual what's in the sky. That's the constellations, the bright stars. And then I'll get into the suggested targets tonight. Thank you very much, Lee. So I've split it into visual and photographic, and then I'm going to talk about the early risers for tomorrow morning. And then I'm going to talk about a couple of updates. So the T Corona Borealis Nova, of course, and Tsuchinchan Atlas. So, okay, let's get into it. General conditions at this time of year. We are approaching the equinox. Hooray! If you happen to be living in the Northern Hemisphere, the Southern Hemisphere, of course, we're going to be losing our light fairly quickly. And you can see it when you're out in the mornings walking a dog and stuff like that. You get out and you don't need to use your headlights quite so much anymore. And, you know, so we're starting to see it. And at the time of the equinox, that's when you're actually losing light at the fastest rate. So sunset's just after 6. It's dark about an hour later. Next month, it's going to be 6:30 or 6:34, and that's AEST, of course. We go into summertime in some stage in the next couple of weeks. So, but I've left that there so you can compare it. Sunrise is about, again, 6:30, and it's going to be dark until, that's not right. Oh, that's sunrise. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, it's so that's next month. It's 5:41 a.m. Again, AEST. Milky Way season. If you're a Milky Way aficionado, you're going to have to get on your bike. There are still opportunities. You're going to have to talk. You're going to have to point towards the west, and it does mean you'll be able to get some nice stuff on the ground with the Milky Way behind it. So it's not entirely over yet. Now, for young astronomers, let's see. There are 2 eclipses this month. And how are they different? And why won't we be able to see either of them? So, oh well, too bad. Okay, for the selenologists, the cheese lovers, full moon is on Wednesday, the 18th of September, which is just a couple of days away. Now, it crosses to the north on the 18th, remember this date. And because it crosses to the north on the same day, there's a lunar eclipse, which we can't see. And perigee is also on the same day, which means that the media is going to go bananas, because there's a super moon, which means utterly nothing. It rises at sunset and sets at sunrise, which is what a full moon does. And for the week following that, we view it at night and then in the morning as waning gibbous. Last quarter is on Wednesday the 25th. Again, it rises at midnight, sun sets at noon, which is what last quarter moons do. And then we'll be seeing it later as a waning crescent. In the morning, that's when you look at it, and in the early afternoon, it's good for daytime viewing. It's going to be moving out of the northern hemisphere, which means it will be low in the sky but coming up. Crosses to the south on the 2nd, which means again, 2nd is the solar eclipse, which we again can't see. The new moon, I'll just get through this fairly quickly because the rest of it's less important. New moon is on Thursday, the 3rd of October. It's a mini moon, which actually is relevant to the solar eclipse. It rises at sunset and sets at so it runs at sunrise and sets at sunset. The sun, you can't see it because it's a new moon. First quarter is after the next meeting, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. Now, here is the graph. Here we go. What I've done is I've got a number of bits and pieces of information. I've got declination of the moon, which is this one here, and I've got the declination of the sun, which is that one there. But I've also got the illumination of the moon, which is how much light it gets, and the distance the moon is away from the Earth. Now, I've put these all on the same graph, so otherwise it's just nuts. So what does all this mean? Well, there's the illumination, which means that up there, full illumination is a full moon, and down here is the new moon. Can people see that, or should I move a little further away? All right. So the next one is the lunar. You can never see a new moon. True, Perry. The lunar declination, that's the place on the Earth you have to stand for the moon to be going over directly over your head. So that's in the south. Don't worry about that. It's a rounding error. This is when the moon is in the... No, not that one. That one. This is where the moon is in the south, and that is when the moon is in the north. Lunar distance, obviously, mini moon and maxi moon, super moon. Furthest away, the smallest appearance. And this is the solar declination. As you can see, it moves out of the northern hemisphere and into the southern hemisphere around about that point there. So now, what's happening? That's an equinox. And but here is where the declination of the moon and the declination of the Earth are the same, which means that they are in the same line when they go over your head. If you're standing about 2 degrees north of the horizon of the equator, and guess what? That is a full moon, meaning the Earth, the sun, and the moon are all in a line. So you get a lunar eclipse because the moon is behind, but not quite, which means it's a partial eclipse. So, and then over here is those lines cross again, and at the same time we've got a new moon, which means that you've got a solar eclipse, but there's always a but. Any moon, which means it's an annular eclipse. So this diagram can give you a lot of information, and it can also befuddle a whole pile of people. All right, let's get into the planets, shall we? Planets over the next month. Mercury is currently a morning object. It rises before 6 a.m. Today. It's going to be good viewing of late because it was brightest yesterday and greatest elongation last week. But Mercury moves very, very quickly, so it's going to get closer to the sun and become an evening object by early October. So, and this information you get in the back pages of the ASV yearbook. Venus, I suppose you've all noticed, Venus is really, really bright at the moment. It's nearly maximum illumination, and it's an evening object and you practically hear it, but it is set now. It sets at 8:15. Mars rises at after midnight. It's going to keep rising earlier, and it's going to move towards retrograde in December. It's got its next close pass in what, halfway through next year or something like that, isn't it? People are nodding blankly. Okay, Jupiter rises ahead of Mars, so it's about 1:15. It's going to be consistently earlier until it goes to opposition in early December. It's going to start its retrograde fairly shortly, so it's going to start to move backwards, back towards the Pleiades. It came past the Pleiades before. It's going to go backwards. So it's retrograde retrograde motion is something which I love because I did philosophy of science, and it's something that really turned the brains of a lot of very, very intelligent people into pretzels. So, but I think they figured it out eventually. Saturn opposition was last week, which I don't know if anybody saw photographs of the retroreflective rings. They glowed very nicely. It's rising at sunset, and it's in a great position now for viewing, especially from the Troutland Sims telescope, which is a refractor telescope, which is far superior to the Mercer. So Uranus it rises just before midnight, and it's good morning viewing. The opposition is in mid-November. You'd need a reasonably decent telescope to see Uranus. No jokes, please. And Neptune is another overnight object. It follows Saturn, rises about 6:45. Pluto, the planet, rises in the early afternoon. It's about sets about 4:30. It's a great object overnight if you can find it. So, can you see it? This is a photograph taken by Laurie Chern, who's an astronomer who works out of Orbost. So now that star there, HIP 99903, that is magnitude 7.8, and that's the brightest star in that field. By the way, you notice that that field is not corrected. I didn't have any flats for that, or Laurie didn't. Pluto is magnitude 14, and there it is down there. So he nearly missed it. It's hard to hit. So Stuart Beveridge, who I think I ripped this off without permission, but he put it on Facebook, so fair game, I reckon. So Stuart found Pluto. And the best way of finding Pluto is you take one photograph, and then the next day you take a second photograph, and the one that moves is probably Pluto. It might be an asteroid, but it's probably Pluto. So so that's how you get Pluto. Okay, so going to the stars for the evening. This is tonight. This is about half an hour ago, I think. So Southern Cross is at about 3:30 on that clock, which is, well, as you can see, I'll just get rid of that clock. There you go. So there's our the Southern Cross is one of our three constellations that we use as road signs. The other one being Scorpius, and the third one, of course, is Orion, which is not here. He's taking that night off. So now the moon is also stuck in Scorpius, but that will move fairly quickly. Don't worry about that. We'll organise that. The orientation stars, I'm going to start west and move around to the north. So Antares is the yellowish-red one in the that's stuck in Scorpius. Speaker is, well, if you can see Speaker, you're pretty good. Either you're up early because it's already set, but yeah, it's there. Vega is low in the north-northwest, and again low. It may be behind trees. Certainly from LMDSS, it tends to be behind trees. Altair is easily found in the north, bang on the meridian at this stage. easy one to find. Saturn is highish, slightly north of east, and I would not advise you to use it as an orientation star because it moves. Fomalhaut, on the other hand, is a lot easier to find. It's due east and high. Achernar, lowish in the southeast, and finally Canopus is probably also in trees down the southeastern horizon. There's the Milky Way. It's well past the zenith, very late into the season now. So, visual targets for the evening. I've just taken some at random. So clearly Venus. It's a bit north of west. It's gone, so it's not in the in this thing. Alberio, I was trying to hit the other day and couldn't find it because we had some clouds. But Alberio is a beautiful, beautiful multicoloured double. So I would, if you haven't seen it, I would definitely recommend it. It's a lovely little thing. It's fairly low in the north. It doesn't get any higher than well where it is there. So it's a good one to get, but only at certain times of year. Beta Crucis and Antares. If you get the chance to have a look at the two of those, check out the difference in the colour, because one of them is yellow and one of them is red and one of them is blue. So you can tell the difference in the colour and therefore the temperature, and learn some stuff. So it's Antares is, I think, around about 2,500 Kelvin, and Mimosa is about 25,000 Kelvin. Actually, might be 26,000. So it's a hot little star. Jewel box, probably one of your last chances to see the jewel box. And if you're looking at Mimosa anyway, it's not very far away, so you should be able to just give the telescope a bit of a nudge. Omega Centauri is also over there. Again, last chance to see, but 47 Tuc is coming. Don't worry. Now, in the Scorpius area, we've got Beta Scorpii, the left of the claws. That's a lovely little double, which is easy to find at this stage, and it's desperately easy to find because it's one of the major stars there. I love this. 6231 is called the False Comet Nebula, which is neither a comet nor a nebula. So yes, it's false. It's a medium-sized cluster. Have a look at it if you can. It's easy to find. It's right next to that right-angle star. I don't even know what that one's called. Butterfly and Ptolemy. I just thought I'd drag these photographs out again because I kind of like them. But again, it's getting a little bit late in the season. But if you're showing people something in a telescope, start off with M7. It's easy to find, and it's really it's nice and big. It's about 1 point something or other degrees wide. So yeah, easy to find, easy to explain. Wild Duck Cluster is something which I haven't actually got a shot of, but it's a very, very busy little thing. So if you can find it, it's at the other end of the galactic core, so you can find that. Then, I don't know, finish with Alpha Centauri. It's an easy cluster, easy double. This is something which I haven't been able to hit yet, the coat hanger asterism. It's CR399. It does actually look like a coat hanger, with the sort of roundabout there, and these ones are straight. But I've never actually hit it. I think with the Troutman Sims, you'll need the military eyepiece to see it because it's really, really big. Alpha Capricorni is another final double. I think it's an optical double, not an actual double. So that's the only thing it's different. Of course, you can't do anything but get Saturn. You wait until the last one for it because otherwise it's a bit low. Saturn is doing a fun little thing at the moment. This is one of Con's photographs. Hello, Con, if you're watching. Thank you. It's closing its rings up in March of next year. It will be completely closed. But more, it's got its equinox in May, which means that it won't be casting any shadows either, which means that between, let's say, April of next year, Saturn will be entirely naked. It'll be kind of weird to see. It's probably another one of those things that the media will say it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Finally, 47 Tuc, it's back. It's rising there. So they're your visual targets for the evening. I think that's all. Yes, that's all. Right. photographic stuff stolen brazenly from Facebook. Rick Zhang, who lives in Perth these days, I had a yarn to him the other day. If you're watching, hello again. He took this marvellous shot of the both sides of the Veil Nebula. It's a very, very wide angle. I think he took with a 250mm lens. Eddie Pang always gets a shot in my talks, I think. That's fantastic. That's simply called LDN43. I don't know if it has a proper name, but it's not very far out of Scorpius. Clive Garner gets a shot today. Clive is not known as an astrophotographer. He's known as a high precision tinkerer, but he must have been a test shot with testing somebody's mount or something. Eagle Nebula. This is my photograph, and I put it in simply to irritate Diego. I'm colorblind. I cannot see that is green, but apparently it is. So he looks at it and just his brain explodes. It's hilarious. Dumbbell Nebula. Jeff Healy has got a nice shot. This is from a couple of weeks ago. The Dragons of Ari. Kelly has taken a lovely photograph of this. I don't know if that's a 533 or not, but it's a square image, and she's got the planetary nebula at the bottom. Helix Nebula. Pardon? It was? There you go. So yes, again, another one of my photographs. It's green, sorry, but it's there. A remote image that I took just the other day. This is really nothing much more of a test image. You can see there's a lot of noise in that shot, but that's a Sculptor Galaxy, which is on its way up. So it's Sculptor season, and I think that's about it for the Facebook lot. So tomorrow morning, facing south. Get rid of that. Oh no, there's the Southern Cross is going to come around about 8 o'clock, and Orion is up, approaching the meridian, and we've got a bunch of planets. We've got Pluto, which is gone. We've got Saturn. We've got Neptune, which doesn't get a mention there. We've got Uranus, which is not far from the Pleiades. There's Jupiter, which is about to reverse and go back towards Uranus. Mars is further back. And that's about it. Next, Tsuchinchan is still not quite viewable yet, but you might be able to get it tomorrow morning if you're very, very lucky and it's not cloudy, but you do have a small window of opportunity. It rises at 5:18 and the sun rises at 6:28. So, but I'll get back to that in a second. Come on. Right. Now the sad news. Okay, I've made a few observations on the 10th of July and the 28th of July and the 5th of August and the 7th of August and the 22nd of August. And as you can see, it has done sweet FA. So I got one last shot on the 7th of September, and this is what the all-sky camera looked like. It was not good viewing. And you can see that there's still a little bit of sunshine or sun glow left over, but those clouds were not looking good. So I did get a shot, and it's, as you can see, it's a terrible photograph, really bad signal to noise ratio, but you can tell that it has done, again, nothing. So what's going to happen is it's going to get squashed between the sun and basically it's squashed by the sun. It's going to disappear, and we are not going to be able to see what happens when it goes off. It's going to be next visible in late January, which means that chances are it will have gone, but I don't know. Maybe there's some spectroscopic way of finding out whether it's happened. Finally, Tsuchinchan Atlas. These are screenshots from Stellarium because I don't have any photographs of it. Well, actually, I do have a photograph of it, but not from a few weeks. Now, tomorrow morning, it does have a little bit of a time. These are at 5:30. So okay, a week and a half later, it's risen, and they're saying it's going to get a little tail. 28th of September is the perihelion, which means that's when it gets its warmest, and so it's going to get its start to get the tail going. A few days later, 2nd of October, is the maximum elongation, but of course it's coming around a little bit, so you can't really tell. But this, I reckon, is probably our best time for viewing, because after that it goes back down and it's come from behind the sun towards us, and it's going to go between the sun and the Earth, and then it's going to turn around and become this is the morning. It's going to turn around and become an evening object, but that's after next month. So with any luck, we'll get some images for next month. And please, if you've got any, put them up on Facebook, and I will plagiarise them without hesitation. Okay, so some dates. 17th of September, there's a Saturn-Moon conjunction. Then there's 21st, Neptune is at opposition. Then there's the spring equinox, which probably doesn't hurt. 28th of September is the perihelion. Then the maximum elongation a few days later of Tsuchinchan Atlas. And then daylight savings begins, so don't forget to change your clocks and stuff. Then 9th of October, Jupiter moves into retrograde. And if you've got a chance and it goes off, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. What I might do for you is take a photo of the wild duck cluster through the 12-inch Mercer.
Will it work?
Oh, yeah, it will. I'll be able to see the wild duck cluster because it's a better telescope.
Them's fighting words.
They are fighting words. Bill and I have a running battle as to which telescope at the Melbourne Observatory is better. I think the 12-inch Mercer is, and Bill thinks the Troughton Sims is.
Yeah. Blake was demonstrating with me on Monday at the Mercer.
And he said the 12-inch is better, didn't he?
No, he didn't actually. He didn't say much. But what I really think I should do is I'll come and demonstrate at the Mercer once.
Yep.
And then I'll say refractors are crap and reflectors are the bee's knees, and I'll just gaslight everybody.
See, I love reflectors, but I use 2 refractors. I'm conflicted.
I use 2 refractors. They're these ones.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. Wonderful tour of the night sky. I'll chop that one up as well as I do the other ones, and we'll put that on separately on our YouTube. So if you just want to watch just that, it'll be on our YouTube to watch.
You want to watch me and not Fred?
Yeah, people like you. Okay. You're a friendly guy. Once again, thank you to Fred. He's done a semi-runner. He's on the radio at the moment, talking to some people in Canberra and New South Wales. But he is hanging around for those who are here who want to have a chat with him afterwards. He said as soon as he's done there, he'll be back to have a chat with everybody. Thank you once again to everybody for coming along. Next month, trying to still lock in a man by the name of Kobe Brown, who's an astrophysicist who has done work with NASA and Google and Apple. But if I can't get him, we have got somebody else lined up possibly as well. So more information on that probably in the next week as to who will be here next month. No Melbourne Observatory tonight because it's raining outside. And thank you, Bill, again for your tour of the night sky. And we'll see everybody next month. And for those who are here who haven't already had supper, supper is on again following the talk. Oh, and the library will be open again in about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Yep, there we go. We'll see you next month.